Megan is completely useless as a wife. I quietly opened the front door, thinking no one would be in the living room. But the voices stopped me in my tracks, and I found myself holding my breath, straining to listen. Maybe it's because she didn't have parents to teach her proper manners. But at least give her credit for trying. She's trying, sure, but in all the wrong ways. Maybe she just doesn't understand her own worth. Effort alone doesn't change anything. In that moment, I couldn't care anymore. They spoke about me however they pleased, oblivious to my feelings. I was tired of being their obedient puppet. As I slipped off my shoes, I called out, "I'm home." Nicole, my mother-in-law, wasted no time. "Could you make some coffee?" she asked. I took off my coat and walked into the kitchen, turning on the stove to heat a pot. I glanced at Nicole's fingers. "Nicole, hasn't your finger healed by now?" We were living together because of her injury, but it was time for her to go home. I asked, my voice steady but firm. Nicole, unfazed, answered with her usual calmness. "It still hurts." It was obvious to anyone that her finger was perfectly fine. The pot began to steam, its contents nearing a boil. I stared at it, my hands motionless, unwilling to turn off the heat. "She's living here because she's hurt, isn't she? A cold-hearted wife like you wouldn't help anyone heal." "Exactly. Megan, it's already boiling. Why waste gas? Just make the coffee already." The two of them were laughing. As I watched them share their laughter, something snapped inside me. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Fine, I'll leave. You two can enjoy yourselves without me," I said, turning off the stove and grabbing my coat again. "My name is Megan. Last year, I lost my mom to illness. We never had a great relationship, especially after she opposed my dream of attending fashion school. Determined, I put myself through school with scholarships and worked relentlessly after graduation. Fashion has always been my passion, and I knew the road ahead would be tough. I worked as an assistant stylist, hoping to one day break out on my own. Even with a modest income, I was driven by the fulfillment my work brought me. But Mom never understood. She would say, "Just get a job at a big company's office." Her words infuriated me, pushing me further away until I stopped going home for Christmas altogether. "I don't care if it's hard. I just want to do what I love." We fought often, and it wasn't pretty. But every time we parted ways, Mom would give me a small, sad wave. No matter how angry she might have been, she always tried to leave on a note that wasn't too bitter. When I heard she had passed away from an illness I didn't even know she had, it felt like a bad joke. She was still in her 50s. The thought of her dying had never crossed my mind. After the funeral, the world kept turning. Even though one person had vanished from it forever, everyday life around me remained unchanged. After work, I'd return to my small apartment and, out of habit, switch on the TV. The cheerful voices from the screen felt jarring, as if the world was pretending nothing had happened. When was the last time I talked to Mom? What did we talk about? No matter how hard I tried to recall, I couldn't. I sat there, clutching my head, groaning in frustration. Nothing changed. Only the noise of the TV grated on my nerves, so I grabbed the remote and turned it off. Dad didn't come to Mom's funeral. He had divorced her when I was little, and I couldn't even remember his face. A part of me wanted to meet him, but neither I nor any of my relatives had his contact information. The tension between Mom and me wasn't just about her not understanding my dreams. A big part of it was her refusal to tell me why she divorced Dad. I could only recall fragments of a gentle smile from my father in my earliest memories. Now Mom was gone, and I had no way to reach Dad. I really am all alone now, I muttered to no one in particular, laughing bitterly at my own words. I'd lived alone for so long that I thought Mom's death wouldn't make me feel lonely. But, for some reason, I kept waking up at midnight. Once awake, I couldn't fall back asleep. Mom was gone. Thinking about that overwhelmed me with sadness and loneliness. I'd bury my face in my blanket, trying desperately to fall asleep again. Lately, my friends from school had been sharing their marriage news with me. Using Mom's death as an excuse, I declined their wedding invitations, but I couldn't help feeling envious. Seeing parents with their children in passing made me think, I want a family too. It was around that time I met David, the man who would become my husband. A friend introduced us. He was 10 years older than me, and at first, I didn't see him as a romantic interest. Though his persistent approach confused me, deep down, I couldn't help but notice his kindness. One day, David and I went out to dinner together. "There's a great barbecue place I know," he said, leading me to a cozy, family-owned restaurant. While enjoying a freshly grilled steak, David started telling me stories from his past. "I've been divorced," he admitted. "My ex-wife cheated on me. We didn't have kids, so I decided to end it." "Oh, I see." "She was beautiful but really high-strung. For example, she'd get angry if I put sauce on my steak." I tilted my head, confused, and he chuckled while pouring sauce from a bottle sitting at the edge of the table. "She thought it was disrespectful to the chef to alter the taste of their food with condiments. She used to say, 'If you want to add sauce, at least ask first.' Somehow I kind of understood her point. I wouldn't be thrilled if someone sprinkled salt or pepper all over my cooking without trying it first. But steak and sauce go hand in hand. It didn't seem like something to get upset over. Or so I thought. Watching David drown his steak in sauce, I started to get it. By the time the steak was utterly soaked, and he was happily devouring it, I thought to myself, yo, maybe she had a point. "Well, the most important thing is to enjoy your meal," I said. David grinned at me, his cheeks stuffed like a chipmunk. That boyish expression of his struck me as oddly endearing. Still, the fact that he'd been divorced lingered in the back of my mind. Even after we started dating, I couldn't stop questioning whether continuing this relationship was the right thing to do. I didn't want to waste my time on a love that wouldn't last. But David always planned our dates with care, sparked engaging conversations, and took the lead, making me feel secure. Over time, I began to see him as someone I could marry. "You should meet my mom next time. She'd be so happy." One evening, as we were having dinner, David said something unexpected. He was busy covering his meal with a generous amount of pepper and sauce, as usual. "Could you at least try a bite before adding all that?" I asked, half exasperated. "Nah, it's my first time at this place. I have no idea what it'll taste like," he replied. A question mark practically popped up above my head, but as I watched him enjoy his meal, I found myself letting it slide. Hearing David talk about his family stirred a warm feeling deep inside me. He told me that his father had passed away a few years ago. Since then, he had been living with his mom, Nicole, to keep her company. To me, that seemed like the ideal picture of a caring family. When I first met Nicole, I was a little nervous, but she welcomed me with kindness. That warmth put me at ease. And before I knew it, we'd grown close. Looking back, it didn't take long for us to develop a friendly relationship. After 2 years of dating, David and I decided to get married. Planning the wedding was surrounded by the excitement and joy of those around us, with plenty of advice from David and Nicole. Their guidance was sometimes reassuring and other times a little overbearing, but in the end, I truly felt we'd had a beautiful wedding. At that time, I wholeheartedly believed our future would be nothing but bright. 3 months into our marriage, we settled into an apartment near David's family home and gradually adjusted to our new life together. One weekend, I was cleaning our apartment while David played video games in the living room. Suddenly, his smartphone rang. "Hello, what's wrong, really?" The call was from Nicole. Though David didn't explain much at the time, he had received shocking news. Nicole had suffered a severe injury. David rushed to the hospital, leaving me anxious and uneasy. A few hours later, I got a call from him. "How is she?" I asked nervously. David's voice sounded serious as he replied, "I'm bringing Mom home for now." Not knowing the full extent of Nicole's injury only added to my apprehension. Shortly after, David returned with Nicole in tow. Her left hand was wrapped in bandages, her face pale and drawn. David helped her to the couch, saying with complete certainty, "A sprained finger must hurt a lot. Don't worry, Mom will take care of you until your hand heals." I couldn't help but look back and forth between David and Nicole in disbelief. Is a sprained finger really something to be this concerned about? I thought to myself, but I kept my doubts to myself. Nicole, however, looked so apologetic that it drained any frustration I felt. "Megan, I'm so sorry. My left hand hurts so much it's embarrassing. Growing old is such a curse. I'm sorry, truly sorry." She apologized over and over, looking genuinely remorseful. I told myself that helping family in times of need was the right thing to do, and I reluctantly agreed to let her stay with us. After all, she was David's mother, and it was only natural to support her when she needed help. But just a few days into our arrangement, Nicole's attitude changed entirely. Whenever I cooked dinner, she'd have some complaint. "This is too bland. Add more salt," she would demand, scrutinizing the plates on the table with disapproval. Nicole also insisted on having dinner promptly at 7 p.m. every evening, with no exceptions. Even a 5-minute delay was unacceptable. "David and Nicole, you both use too much salt and sauce. It's bad for your health," I pointed out one evening. "As David's wife, you should be more considerate. Your job is to cook the kind of meals David likes." "I understand that, but I'm also trying to think about his health," I countered. David's ex-wife said the same things over and over. "All you modern women are the same face, same words." Oh, how tiresome. I was at a loss for words. Dragging my exhausted body to the corner of the kitchen, I let out a heavy sigh. David, noticing my mood, smiled gently at me, smartphone in hand, still playing his game. "You should listen to what Mom says, Megan. She's a pro in the kitchen," he said casually. "That's right," Nicole chimed in. "I've been doing this for decades. Don't think you can just get it right so easily." Her patronizing tone made my frustration bubble up even more. Day by day, my irritation grew. Nicole, citing her injured hand, spent her days sprawled on the couch watching TV. Whenever I vacuumed, she would loudly turn up the volume, ignoring my efforts entirely. "Could you bring me some coffee?" she'd call out without a second thought. I'd think to myself, "Can't you do that yourself?" And one evening, David quietly approached me as if sensing my frustration. "Sorry, Mom can be a bit demanding," he whispered apologetically. But David always took her side without question. Despite this being our home, I started to feel like a guest in my own space. Finally, I summoned my courage to speak up during dinner. "Look, even with an injured hand, there are still things you can do, right? Could you help out a bit with chores like cleaning or laundry? Just whatever's manageable." It took all my strength to say this, but both David and Nicole responded with laughter. What are you talking about, Megan? Stop acting like a guest. David scoffed. That's right, Nicole added. You're David's wife now. It's your job to do as I say. Their reaction was as if I had cracked a joke. Instead of the tension I expected, they dismissed my plea as though it were a trivial matter. Is this what a normal family is like? I tried to convince myself that it was. But every day, Nicole continued to hurl demeaning comments at me. You're useless, always moving so inefficiently. Even David, who had once been so kind, now stood firmly on Nicole's side, often joining in with his own remarks. Mom's old. Don't upset her so much, he'd say. Write things down if you can't remember them. Stop making her repeat herself. It just ends up coming back to me as complaints. Think about how that feels for me. Why do you only listen to Nicole? I'm your family too. I finally shouted through stifled tears. But David looked at me with a puzzled expression, as if he couldn't comprehend my feelings. Because Mom is the most important person to me, he replied earnestly. His words left me utterly stunned. On the outside, everything seemed perfect, an ideal family environment. But in reality, I was completely isolated. The growing storm of anxiety and fear within me gradually turned into a desire to consider divorce. Where was I standing now? I found myself pondering this as I watched David and Nicole laughing together, their backs turned to me. How many more days like this would I have to endure? Each time the cold wind brushed against me, my resolve became clearer, and I began to prepare myself. It was dusk, the sky dimming as I let out a sigh in the corner of the kitchen. A year had passed since Nicole had moved in. Countless times, I'd tried to ask her to leave, but each time, she deflected with, "My finger still hurts." Hearing those words again and again, I couldn't help but feel the weight of all the time being wasted. We're family, so of course we help each other, David would say with an innocent smile. Looking at that smile, I'd often feel as though my protests were the ones that were wrong. He even started bringing up my troubled upbringing, chipping away at my self-esteem. Yet, occasionally, I'd hear from neighbors that Nicole had been praising me in my absence. Hearing such stories left me with a swirl of complicated emotions. Her words felt like a twisted form of encouragement, as if she wielded both a whip and a gift. Despite feeling unappreciated, a part of me still longed for her approval. I didn't entirely hate the part of me that kept trying, hoping for recognition someday. One evening, I came home late from work. It was past midnight. The lights in the house were still on, but assuming Nicole might be asleep, I opened the door quietly. From the living room, where I thought no one would be, voices reached my ears. I stopped in my tracks, holding my breath, and listened. Honestly, Megan is completely useless as a wife, Nicole said, her voice slow but sharp. David chuckled and responded with a few agreeing murmurs. Maybe it's because she grew up without parents and never learned any common sense. Still, you've got to give her credit for trying. She's trying in all the wrong ways, Nicole shot back. She doesn't even understand her own worth. Effort alone won't change anything. At that moment, I felt something inside me snap. My feelings didn't matter to them, they just said whatever they pleased behind my back. I was exhausted from living under their thumb, bending to their every whim. I slipped off my shoes at the entrance and called out, "I'm home." Nicole immediately responded, "Could you make me some coffee?" Hanging up my coat, I headed to the kitchen and turned on the stove. As I prepared the kettle, my gaze drifted to Nicole's fingers. "Nicole, don't you think your finger has healed by now?" Shaking off all the doubts and unease that had been holding me back, I straightened my posture and addressed her firmly. Nicole, however, replied with a calm expression, It still hurts. It was obvious to anyone that her finger no longer pained her. The pot on the stove began to warm, the quiet hiss growing as it reached a boil. I stood there, staring at the steam rising from the pot, without turning off the flame. She's living here because she's in pain, right? With a cold-hearted wife like you. No wonder it's taking longer to heal. Exactly. And Megan, the water's already boiling. Don't waste gas. Hurry up and make me my coffee, Nicole added with a smirk. The two of them burst into laughter, watching their cheerful faces from a short distance away. I felt something inside me finally snap. I couldn't take it anymore. Well, in that case, I'll be the one to leave. The two of you can live happily ever after. I turned off the stove, slipped back into my coat, and made my way to the door. Both David and Nicole looked stunned, clearly unprepared for my words. As I headed to my room to grab the bags I had packed in advance, they hurried after me, panic in their voices. Come on, you're joking, right? You can't live on your own. Megan, when are you coming back? Who's going to make my breakfast or dinner? Are you just going to abandon me like this? Nicole cried out. Ignoring their commotion, I started packing my clothes into a couple of bags. I had always been the type to own little, so all my belongings fit neatly into a travel suitcase and a backpack. For a whole year, I've endured this. Megan, don't you know? Being a woman means enduring things after marriage. You endure, and that's how you live. Understand? Nicole said matter-of-factly. No, I don't understand, I replied bluntly. Hopeless, Nicole muttered, throwing up her hands. Mom, let's just let her go until she calms down, David said, sighing and slumping his shoulders, as if I was the one being unreasonable. For 1 year. What do you think I've been enduring this for? My voice trembled as I spoke. They wouldn't understand what I meant by 1 year. It was exactly a year ago when I had overheard a similar conversation, purely by chance. Back then, just like tonight, they were mocking and insulting me behind my back. An entire year had passed since then, and nothing had changed. I had spent that year preparing to walk out of this house and end this marriage. But deep down, I hoped that day would never come. I thought that packing my things and keeping them ready to leave would help me sort out my feelings, to make sense of my life. But now, standing here, I knew this was the end. In an effort to secure the upper hand in the divorce, I went so far as to hire a private investigator to look into David's activities. The findings were shocking. This man had been cheating on me. With all the recordings of the verbal abuse you've hurled at me and the solid proof of your infidelity, I have everything I need. Goodbye. As I finished speaking, both David and Nicole turned pale. Ignoring their reactions, I left the house. I had no family home to return to, no place that felt like mine, but I had no choice but to move forward. Stepping out of the warm glow of the apartment, I was greeted by a dimly lit street stretching out before me. A few days later, I found myself staying at my Aunt Amanda's house. She was my late mom's sister, someone I'd had very little contact with over the years. Even so, she was the closest thing I had to family. Relying on her was a last resort, something I felt uneasy about, but I had no other option. When I briefly explained my situation to Amanda, she immediately agreed to take me in. Never married and living alone for as long as I could remember, she simply said, "Use the room as you like." Amanda bore a striking resemblance to my mom, reserved, with eyes that seemed cold at first glance. That night, when I fled my house and called Amanda, I arrived at her place expecting the bare minimum, a roof to shield me from the rain. To my surprise, She had prepared a neatly made bed in an unused room and offered it to me without hesitation. The room was modest, with an old bookshelf filled with magazines and photo albums, and a child-sized desk in one corner. For someone who had no children, the presence of a child's room felt like it carried its own complicated history. You're free to use anything in the room or the living room. Make yourself at home, Amanda said in her usual matter-of-fact tone. Though her expression seemed cold, her actions were unexpectedly kind. I took her words to heart and allowed myself to feel at ease under her roof. It was a quiet morning. As I brewed coffee in the kitchen, my smartphone buzzed loudly on the counter. David's name appeared on the screen. The moment I heard his voice on the other end of the line, an uneasy stirring began in my chest. "Megan, the certified letter you sent reached me." David's voice was calm, unsettlingly so, like the stillness before a storm. The letter I'd sent, drafted by my lawyer, had finally arrived at his doorstep. It detailed the verbal abuse I had endured, his blatant infidelity, and my intention to end our relationship. Every word was carefully chosen, avoiding unnecessary emotional outbursts, while ensuring the message was firm and clear. It was the definitive declaration of the end of our marriage. Within me, a storm of emotions brewed: anger, sadness, and a faint sense of relief. This is how you want to do it, Megan," David said bitterly. David's mistress was a young woman in her 20s, raised in a wealthy family. Her parents owned a successful business, and rumors swirled in my mind that David and Nicole were scheming to get their hands on her family's fortune. If this woman had no idea about David's marital status, I felt a twinge of pity for her, but that pity was quickly overshadowed by my growing fury toward him. "David, you lied to her about being single, didn't you? What kind of man proudly announces he's married while cheating?" Of course, I didn't tell her. I figured once things progressed with her, I'd end things with you. I was planning to take responsibility. Should I be angry right now? The audacity in his voice as he spoke of taking responsibility baffled me. The thought of that young woman, believing the lies he told, made my blood boil. She was so much younger than him. Perhaps she, too, had been persistently pursued, just as I had been. David's dishonesty wasn't just destroying my life, it was pulling others into his mess, and that infuriated me. "That's not all," David continued. Her parents came storming into my office. Knowing that David was finally facing the consequences of his actions gave me a small sense of satisfaction. The mistress's parents must have been furious to learn their daughter had been involved in an affair with a married man. I have to pay her a settlement. The affair partner's parents were reasonably wealthy. They seemed furious that their daughter had been deceived into an affair with an older, married man. This wasn't just about a simple settlement. They were determined to inflict the maximum punishment on David. Reports suggested they were actively consulting lawyers and doing everything they could to hold him accountable. David's words were tinged with desperation. "And Mom says it's all your fault, Megan." "Oh, really?" I said, my voice icy. "So, I was thinking," David hesitated, "maybe you could cover half of the settlement." "No, actually, it makes sense for you to take care of, 80% of it." At that moment, pure rage ignited within me. This had nothing to do with me. David's infidelity was his own doing, and he alone should bear the consequences. I gripped my smartphone tightly, resisting the overwhelming urge to hurl it out the window. "I'm the wronged wife here, David," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "If anything, I should be the one demanding compensation from her. You can't do that. If you go after her, her family will retaliate against me even harder." You'd just be taking money from me to give back to yourself. It's pointless. Be reasonable for once. Oh, sorry. I forgot I don't have parents to teach me about reason. Right. I threw his previous insult right back at him. A heavy silence followed before his voice suddenly erupted, filled with rage. This is all your fault. Your fault her parents showed up at my company. David's anger exploded, his yelling sounding like a desperate attempt to shift blame and hide his own failures. I couldn't help but smile. So what? There's my position at the company to think about. My status, my reputation, everything is gone. And it's all your fault. If you had just been patient, none of this would have happened. You chose to cheat. Just because I sent a legal notice doesn't mean you can shift the responsibility for your actions onto me. That's incredibly irresponsible, don't you think? His anger seemed to freeze for a moment. I could almost feel his uncertainty, like he was struggling to come up with a response. He probably didn't know what to say, his brain trying hard to make sense of the situation. I didn't do anything wrong. But you didn't do anything wrong. You're the one who cheated. I had raised my voice in anger, and it seemed to wake Amanda, who came out from her bedroom. I quickly lowered my tone, muttering a quick apology. Have you ever thought about how your actions affect other people? The mess your life is in now is not my fault. It's the result of your own choices. David was silent. I could feel his anger dissipating like bubbles bursting. Don't you ever try to shift the blame onto me again. You have to face the consequences of the choices you made, and that's all there is to it. When I ended the call, I felt proud of the choice I had made. I had regained my ability to protect myself. Amanda retrieved milk from the fridge and poured it into a glass. She handed me the cold milk, and I quietly thanked her. Are you getting a divorce? Yes, of course. He cheated on me. And on top of that, I lived with him like a servant, day after day. I see. Well, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. I glanced at Amanda in surprise, but she had already turned her back and walked toward the bathroom to wash her face. Despite not having been close with my relatives, I was moved by how kind Amanda had been to me. I was truly grateful. Later, David and I finalized our divorce, and we became strangers to each other. With time, the weight of the past slowly lifted, and I felt the beginnings of hope for a new future. I would no longer be at the mercy of David. From now on, I would carve out my own life. 6 months passed, living with Amanda, who had the opposite temperament of Nicole, always harsh and loud, was surprisingly comfortable. It was more than just comfortable. It was almost too comfortable. Amanda was a neat freak, always well-dressed, even when inside the house. Being in the fashion industry myself, I could tell that many of Amanda's clothes were high-end brands. When I asked her about it, she explained that she also worked in the fashion industry and received clothing from designers and stylists. Over the 6 months we lived together, I had come to trust Amanda quite a bit. Sometimes, we would have drinks together at night. Amanda liked red wine, and she would slowly sip on bottles I'd never heard of. You know, I'm in a pretty good place now. I have some time, and my finances are comfortable. But when I was your age, I struggled. I lost everything: family, everything. Were you not close with Mom? We never really kept in touch with relatives. She didn't like me. She was always too busy. Never visited the parents, didn't even cook properly. But me, Amanda stared at the wine left in her glass. I had only ever thought of Amanda as someone who knew my late mother. The room I was staying in had traces of a young girl, probably a child in elementary school. The drawer of a new desk was empty. On the bookshelf, there were picture books and fashion magazines. I didn't feel like Amanda had lost a young daughter. But I wondered if there was a daughter I didn't know about. That daughter could be around my age now. I couldn't help but wonder about the feelings shared between Amanda and my mother. It wasn't something that could be described as sadness or regret, something only Amanda and Mom could have shared. Being an only child, I even felt a little envious of that connection. Then, out of the blue, David started showing up at my office, waiting for me. After work, I would see him standing outside the company gates. When he spotted me, he'd wave at me with a big smile. It wasn't every day, but when I noticed him, I would call a cab from the company, ignore him, and get into the car without a word. But David's presence became a topic of gossip at the company, and people started to look at me oddly. One of my subordinates even told me, "Your ex-husband is stalking you." I was starting to get fed up. I wondered if he was waiting for me again today. After working overtime, I was walking down the dimly lit corridor of the office building, ready to leave. The building was eerily quiet, with only the occasional sound of footsteps making my insides uneasy. The moment I stepped off the elevator, I spotted David. He was waiting in front of the smoking area inside the company. He must have told the security at the gate that he was my husband, with a cigarette in his hand. He looked pale, his eyes unfocused. When he noticed me, he quickly stubbed out the cigarette in the ashtray and rushed toward me. "Hey, Megan. Wait up," David's voice echoed. I decided to ignore him, quickening my pace. I couldn't stop, especially with all the eyes of my colleagues on me. The smell of smoke wafting from the smoking area tickled my nose. Then I heard him shout from behind, "I'll keep coming until you talk to me." My feet froze involuntarily. If he kept waiting for me every day, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't just keep running away from him. I steeled myself and turned to face David. As the eyes of those around us focused on me, I felt an overwhelming sense of silent pressure. "David, I need to talk to you. Let's move to another place." I spoke calmly, but David immediately began to plead. His sudden action seemed to shake me, leaving me speechless as he locked eyes with me. "Let's try again. I love you." David's voice echoed through the area. The weight of the gazes from everyone around us made my embarrassment and anger swell. "Please stop. People are watching us. I won't stop until you forgive me, Megan. It's all Mom's fault." "What?" "I was raised by Mom to believe that a good wife is like a housekeeper, so I thought it was your fault for not being able to do it." His words struck me like a fist to the chest. It was true. Nicole had been like a tyrant. The way she demanded cleaning be done a certain way, the exact seasoning for meals, and how she expected an immediate response if she spoke, it was overwhelming. Perhaps David, raised in that environment, was also a victim, just like me. I was at a loss for words, torn by confusion. A Mini Cooper suddenly stopped on the road a little further away. Amanda, in pink pants and a white blouse, got out of the car and walked toward me. It seemed she had come to pick me up for the dinner we had planned tonight. "Megan, I came to get you. Let's go." Well, I was at a loss for how to introduce David, who was kneeling right in front of me. David, unsure who Amanda was, seemed to be sizing her up. "I'm starving. Let's go." Amanda's nonchalant attitude made me want to laugh. Here was a man pleading at my feet, and she was just ignoring him, casually inviting me to the car. It helped me regain some composure. Suddenly, I remembered something about David's ex-wife. David had claimed she had cheated on him. But what was the real story? "David, tell me about your ex-wife. Did she really cheat on you?" "She betrayed me too," David shouted. It was only then that Amanda realized he was someone I knew, and cast a cold stare at him. right after the divorce. She got a boyfriend. That's cheating. I was stunned. How had I ever fallen for this person? The murmurs of my colleagues around us grew louder as they listened in. I couldn't hold back anymore. I took out my smartphone and called the police. Hello, is this the police? There's a disturbance near my company. Please come quickly. A few minutes later, the police arrived, and David was escorted away. Since there was no serious crime involved, he would probably be released soon. Amanda, with her distant gaze, watched as David was taken away. Don't ever fall for a man like that, she said with a serious expression. After that, I began working remotely for a while. I was still staying at Amanda's house, and David wouldn't know where I was. Still, I would occasionally receive messages from him, calls from unknown numbers. I had a bad feeling, but I decided to answer. Hello. I answered the phone with anxiety. It was Nicole's voice on the other end. Without greeting me, she started talking about how she had no money left due to the settlement, and how her life had become difficult. She complained that she couldn't do the cooking or laundry as well as she used to when I was there. When I got married, my mother-in-law also taught me all sorts of things. I'm just repeating the same things. Why am I the only one being blamed? In the background, I could hear David's crying and shouting. His voice was emotionally charged, lacking any calmness one would expect from a middle-aged man. There were incoherent screams, and all I could make out was, "It's all Megan's fault. You're the one who put me through this." It was terrifying. I fought to myself, hugging my own shoulders. Even though we were divorced, he kept clinging to me, showing abnormal behavior. Nicole started demanding money from me. Money. Give me money. It was nothing short of a threat. Even through the phone, hearing Nicole yell made me recall the past. Being alone with no family of my own, I didn't want to be disliked by Nicole. After all, even though she was my mother-in-law, she was still family to me. I just wanted to be loved. I had worked so hard just to be loved. That was the only thing I wanted. At that moment, Amanda extended her hand toward me. It was a gesture to ask me to hand her the phone. Without thinking, I handed my smartphone to Amanda. Her cold eyes seemed to soften just a little. Good evening. Who are you? Where's Megan? I have nothing to say to you. I'm Megan's aunt. For reasons, I'm taking care of her now. We are like strangers after the divorce, so if you have anything to say, you can go through me. Aunt. She said she had no close relatives other than her deceased mom. Yes, that's true. We weren't close, but before Megan's mom passed, she kept telling me to watch over Megan. My mom had realized her illness was terminal and visited Amanda after many years. Amanda, who had abandoned family to live for her career, was disliked by my mom, but she had asked her to help me if I ever found myself in trouble. As I had also chosen a difficult path in the fashion industry, just like her. I remember the other day, David was begging, but you know what Megan's mom asked was nothing like that. I could feel her desire to protect someone really, truly important to her. What are you talking about? I'm Megan's mom's stand-in. Don't ever contact her again. Go eat your steak with that mama's boy, covered in sauce. Without waiting for reply, Amanda pressed the call button on the smartphone. She sighed deeply and looked at me with downcast eyes. Sorry, I didn't mean to say I was like a mom to you. I just remembered the funny story you told me about steak, and I got carried away. Seeing her embarrassed, I understood. Her normally cold eyes and attitude were just signs of her awkwardness, and the fact that my late mom thought of me and entrusted me to Amanda. The days when I was lonely, with no one to rely on, and felt so sad now it all felt like a dream. I realized how much my mom loved me and how happy I truly was. Why? How could this be? Tears streamed down my cheeks. I hadn't cried even at my mom's funeral. I always thought tears were something to hide in bed, not something to show. But now the tears flowed endlessly. And Amanda gently hugged me, hiding my tears. Her awkward gesture of holding me, her fingers gently pressing against my back, made me feel a happiness that made me tremble. Later, from mutual acquaintances, I learned that David and Nicole had asked relatives and friends for money, and when they were refused, they became verbally abusive. As a result, everyone cut ties with them. David, while still working at the company, was passed over for promotions and now worked under younger managers. After completely cutting off contact with David and Nicole, it felt like I had been reborn. I savored the happiness of having time for myself. At work, I was advancing in my career, and my appearance was getting sharper. Not bad at all. You've got the trends down. One morning, as I checked myself in the mirror before heading out, Amanda complimented me from behind. I smiled, feeling the happiness, and laughed, saying, "Stop it." As I headed to work, "Have a good day. I'll be home early since there's no overtime." As I waved goodbye, Amanda squinted her eyes in a smile. Her gentle wave reminded me so much of my late mom.
Get over here now and pick up the old hag we kicked out of our house because we want nothing to do with her. About a month after my father's funeral, I received an unexpected call from Jackson. He had kicked my mother out of the house and demanded that I take care of her from now on. I was taken aback, unable to comprehend the situation immediately. You're joking, right? You didn't actually kick Mom out of the house? Come see for yourself. Oh, and I let her take Dad's memorial tablet. Why would you do something so cruel? I have no use for Mom now that we can't get Dad's inheritance. She's just a poor burden, isn't she? I was shocked. Apparently, my late father had debts, and after paying them off, there was no inheritance left. This was news to me. Even worse, Jackson and his wife had been living in the family home all this time. It was outrageous. It's getting dark soon. If you don't come to pick her up, Mom will be sleeping on the streets. How could you be so cruel? I will never forgive you for this, Jackson. I don't need your forgiveness. That's just too harsh. Jackson hung up without hearing me out, and subsequent calls went unanswered. When I managed to reach my mother, she confirmed that everything Jackson had said was true. Angry at Jackson and worried for my mother, I had no choice but to drive over to where she was. I am Lily, a 27-year-old woman in a hurry. 3 years ago, I married Mason, who is the same age as me, and we've been living together since. At the beginning of our marriage, we lived with my parents in the family home, but 2 years ago, Jackson and his wife abruptly moved in. They said our presence was making the place crowded, and we were forced to leave. My older brother, Jackson, 8 years my senior, has always been selfish, but his marriage seems to have enhanced that trait. Our family home, where I was born and raised, is a spacious mansion inherited from my grandfather, with extensive land. There should be no discomfort in living together. I was not satisfied with the situation and argued with Jackson, but my husband, who hates conflicts, urged us to leave. Around that time, my father was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver, which had already significantly worsened. I wanted to spend his last moments with him, but that didn't happen. The disease rapidly consumed my father, and he passed away a month ago. My heart ached knowing that my mother must be in much more pain than I was. To have my own brother treat us this way, amidst all the fresh sorrow, it was pitiful. What would happen next was truly a shock. An hour later, when we arrived at our family home, my mom was sitting desolate on a suitcase in the garden. The front door was locked. Jackson, she said, had taken her keys. Using my set of keys, I unlocked the door and walked in with my mom. Jackson and Olivia were sprawled on the sofa, nonchalantly watching TV. Is this some kind of joke? Huh? How did you get in? I used my key to open the front door. Isn't it obvious? Slipped my mind. Leave your key, take the old lady, and go. This isn't funny. How can you be watching TV after kicking your own mother out of the house? Besides, if the house remained even after Dad's debts were paid off, Mom has a right to live here. Huh? What are you talking about? Infuriated by Jackson's dismissive attitude, I stood in front of the TV. Mom has a right to inherit this house. If you can't live with her, you should be the one to leave, Jackson. Shut up. This house is mine. Dad gave it to me when he was alive. Don't act smart without knowing anything. What? What do you mean? There's no way Dad gave this house to Jackson before he died. Mom also looked puzzled, shaking her head. In the face of our confusion, Jackson smirked and got up from the sofa, bringing out an envelope from a room in the back. Look at this. What's this? It's proof that I inherited this house. The envelope contained documents proving the inheritance, prepared by a judicial scrivener, and a real estate ownership certificate. He said that the property had been transferred to his name a month before Dad passed away. Mom and I were shocked as we looked at the documents. Why would Dad do something like this? Asking a departed person doesn't yield an answer. I sighed, looking at his picture. Why would Dad hand over the house to Jackson without discussing it with Mom? Because I'm his favorite, of course. I told him that Mom would take the house once he passed away, so he gave it to me while he was still alive. That can't be. I can't believe it. Open your eyes and face the reality. No matter how many times we checked the documents, the property was in Jackson's name. All this, just for a house? My mom muttered in disbelief. Is there no other inheritance? Nothing left for Mom? Nothing. Be glad that the debts are cleared. This can't be real. You're not just worrying about Mom. You realize there's no inheritance for you either, right? The bank card he handed over contained only a few dollars. I wasn't after Dad's inheritance, but it was a shock to learn that he had left me nothing. This is too cruel. And to add insult to injury, Olivia was laughing her heart out seeing our dejection. Now get lost. You poor people have no business here. Jackson and Olivia forcibly drove us out of the house. Ouch! That hurts. Mom had fallen and scraped her palm when they pushed us out. Blood was seeping from the wound. As I wrapped her hand in my handkerchief, tears of frustration welled up and fell. My mother, seeing me like this, gently wiped my tears, her eyes filled with sorrow as well. Mom, our place is small, but come stay with us. But I don't want to impose on Mason. I'll find somewhere else to stay, don't worry. I can't just leave you like this. I'm going to call Mason right now, just wait. Wiping my tears, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed my husband. From the other end of the line, I heard Mason's voice. Hello? Mason. I'm sorry for calling out of the blue. My mom has been kicked out of her house. As I explained the situation to my surprised husband, he hummed in understanding, though he seemed a bit hesitant. I held my breath, waiting for Mason's response. Our apartment is pretty cramped compared to Mom's house. It might not be the most comfortable. Yeah, our place is tiny. But I don't mind. Bring your mom over. We've had times where we were taken care of at home, too. In times of trouble, we should help each other out. Mason, thank you so much. My husband is a kind man with a big heart. He could never leave someone in need. Quickly, we took Mom to our apartment, and from that day on, we lived together. However, living with 3 people in our small apartment was certainly cramped. We don't have enough savings to buy a house yet, but should we move to a slightly larger place? That might be good. I feel bad for your mom in this small space. As my husband and I were searching for properties on the computer, my mom's cell phone rang. After a while, she hung up the phone and said something we never could have imagined. Why don't we live in my Highlands condominium? Wait, what? Highlands condominium? Yes. What do you mean? My mother began to explain, to our surprise. Apparently, my grandfather, who was a wealthy man, was quite a spendthrift and spent all the money he made in a day, on that day. In order to deal with his constant borrowing, my grandmother had no choice but to sell off their farmland and make ends meet. According to my mom, my father was also a big spender. But we don't have any assets other than the house we lived in, so I was really worried about our future. That's why I invested in real estate with the money I earned when I was working before I got married. My husband and I were absolutely stunned. It turns out, in addition to the Highlands condominium, my mom was also managing an apartment building and had made a significant amount of money from her real estate investments. I can't even comprehend this, it's too amazing. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Anyway, I just got a call from the management company that there's a vacancy in the Highlands condominium. We can move in next month, what do you think? There was no reason to refuse such a generous offer. Plus, it was a Highlands condominium with 3 bedrooms, a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen, located just a 5-minute walk from the station, which was much more comfortable than our current situation. Thank you, Mom. But we may only be able to pay as much rent as we are for the apartment. You don't need to worry about that. No way. We have to do this properly, even if we're family. Oh. I need to tell the landlord that we're moving out. Looking at my husband and I beaming with joy, my mother's face brightens too. Time flew by as we busied ourselves preparing to move in. Before we knew it, we had spent 2 months living in our new home, Highlands condominium. As I was about to head out for some shopping, I was taken aback when the Jackson couple suddenly appeared in front of the condominium entrance. Why are you, a pauper, living in Highlands condominium? Did you hit the jackpot or something? Of course not. Highlands condominium has always belonged to my mom. Jackson and Olivia were both taken aback. What? They exclaimed in unison, looking up at the towering condominium. I couldn't help but burst into laughter at their confused and goofy expressions. Jackson, his face flushing red, began to seethe with anger. That wretched woman! I can't believe she was hiding this from us while pretending to be poor. My mom never said she was poor. You just assumed it, Jackson. Plus, she inherited a large house. What's wrong with that? That's not the point! Don't yell here. It's disrespectful to the other residents. Besides, how did you know I was here? Jackson said that when he couldn't reach my mother, he tracked her down using her mobile phone's location. Why are you trying to contact Mom now, after kicking her out? I'd bet it's something nasty again. Regardless, if Mom is here, I want to see her. Let me in, now. You must be joking. If you hurt Mom again, I couldn't bear it. If you have something to say, you can tell me. But they kept insisting on seeing my mother without revealing why. The Jackson couple seemed rather flustered. Weren't you living comfortably in your huge family house, just the 2 of you? It's none of your business. Fine, if you don't want to tell me, that's okay. I have to go now. Bye. As I tried to walk past the Jackson couple, Jackson suddenly grabbed my arm tightly.
Ouch! Let me go! Just call Mom!
Absolutely not. I'll call the police. But Jackson just scoffed at me, as if looking down on me. There's no way the police would come for a simple family argument. Even if they did, there's no way you could sue me for just grabbing your arm. I suppose you're right. It was true. Calling the police over something so minor might not only be futile, but also disruptive to others. I felt bad and ended up not saying anything. Fine. I'll tell my mom, but only if you tell me why you're here. The utility bills for that house are ridiculous. Just for the AC, the electric bill is $500. This is no joke. Their old, traditional house had more than 8 rooms, so it was no surprise that utility costs were high. But even so, a $500 electricity bill seemed a little steep. It was a particularly hot summer, so they probably overused the AC. I thought you would have known that from the start. How could we have known? Mom used to pay the bills. Jackson scratched his head frantically as Olivia fumed. There's no way we would have known. Do you know the property tax for that house is $5,000 a year? What? I can't believe you didn't know. Why would an old house like that cost so much? How are we supposed to pay that? Our house is old and has a large yard, so it's only natural that it would cost a lot to maintain. I also pointed out a reality to the Jacksons that they might not have realized. And you know, apparently it costs more in taxes to give away property while you're alive than after you pass away. This is going to be tough going forward. Wait, is that true? I see you didn't know. I told them this was all true, information I had heard from my mom, and the color drained from the Jacksons' faces. Seeing the stunned Jacksons, Olivia burst out in anger, saying, "It's your fault for not doing your homework." And they started fighting right in front of me. After all the trouble we went through to get Dad to change the name on the house, this is too much. That's what you get for doing something so underhanded. But even Dad said clearly that it would be better to give it to me than to you or Mom. I can't believe it. I was shocked and fell silent, realizing that my father had disregarded my mom and me. Then, seizing the moment, Jackson made an outrageous request. You can have the house. Let's exchange it for this Highlands condominium. What are you talking about? This isn't mine. It belongs to Mom. Please, talk to Mom for me. I beg you. I promise to pass on your message, nothing more. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Feeling ridiculous for even engaging with them, I gave up on shopping and started to head back into the Highlands condominium through the entrance, but the Jacksons tried to follow me in. Their audacity left me speechless. I'll sue you for trespassing. You just told us that wouldn't be a legal issue. It seems like they won't get the message until they suffer a real consequence. Exasperated, I called out to the management office next to the entrance. Excuse me, could you please call the security? Someone who's not a resident of the Highlands condominium is trying to force their way in. What? Wait a minute. The security guard, who was on standby 24/7 at the Highlands condominium, came running immediately. With the large security guard in front of them, the two of them were startled, and I warned them once again to avoid the same thing happening in the future. I didn't call the police just now because you only grabbed my arm, but if you try to use force or enter the Highlands condominium again, I will really call the police, okay? We beg you, don't do that. If I even catch a glimpse of you, I'll report it. So go back to your mansion that you got from Dad, got it? Apparently scared of the police, the Jacksons hastily retreated. I went back to my apartment and told my mother about the exchange with the Jacksons.
But why did Dad let Jackson inherit the house?
As I was feeling downcast, my mom smiled.
Dad must have known what he was doing when he let Jackson inherit. He didn't want to burden me or Lily. Even though Dad was indifferent about money, he cared for me a lot. Of course, he always said he loved Lily so much.
Really? I was overjoyed to hear that my father felt that way about me. When my mom heard about the inheritance from Jackson, she muttered,
"Are you going this far?"
Because she realized that he had given a severe punishment to Jackson, who was always self-centered.
You knew how Dad felt, Mom.
Of course, dear. We've been together for 38 years. I know what he's thinking without him saying a word. Besides, Jackson never took care of Dad when he was sick. I was under the impression that the Jacksons were looking after my father. However, it turns out they hardly ever visited him, not at home and barely in the hospital. When I visited my dad, he would often tell me, "Jackson comes to see me, and you have your job to attend to, Lily. There's no need for you to go out of your way." I took his words to heart, not realizing that it was a gentle lie meant to ease my worries.
I had it all wrong about Dad. I feel awful. I want to apologize. Don't fret, Lily. Your feelings are reaching Dad in heaven. The ones who should worry are the Jacksons. Who these days would buy a big, high-maintenance house like that? I bet they'll struggle to find a buyer. Hee hee.
The truth in my mom's mischievously gleeful words became evident after a while. The Jacksons, unable to maintain the house on their own, had put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer. They continue to live in it, even a year later. In the midst of all this, Olivia accidentally started a grease fire while cooking chicken tempura, and the house quickly burned down. And since they didn't have money for fire insurance, their life is going to get even tougher. While I understand their predicament, it doesn't concern me. Apparently, the Jacksons are now camping out in the burned-down remains of their house. Living in the Highlands condominium is absolutely fantastic, and I can only feel gratitude toward my mother. I've been paying my mom rent every month, but it seems she's been saving it all to ensure we won't face hardship in the future. Every day is filled with peace and happiness as I live with my incredible mother and kind husband. As I visited my father's grave, I vowed to him that I would continue to repay my mother's kindness.